Awaken Beauties, finally, it's here. The truth to empower women to true inner beauty through a healthy mind and inner biology. I am your hostess, Cassandra Keogh, a 20-year salon owner, organic beauty product formulator, positive mind management, and clinical hypnotherapist. And I am here to help you stay sane, get sleep, and bring your sexy back. Sponsored by evoquebeauty.com. evoquebeauty.com. Now, let's get to it. All right. Welcome to the Awaken Beauty podcast. I am Cassandra, your organic beauty, positive mind management, and endocannabinoid mentor. And today we have Miss Lyndsey Berkson on the show, and I am beyond excited to have her on. I have followed her research, her books, her podcasts, and what she's done for a few years. I haven't stalked her, but pretty damn close because she's just a brilliant woman. And today we're going to talk about how hormones are absolutely foundational on many different levels, even more than what women always want to conclude to, meaning exercise or food. So before we get started, I want to share the brilliance behind Lyndsey's background. And so to start off, I want to share that Miss Lindsey is a leader in functional medicine and women's healthcare for many decades. She was a scholar at an estrogen think tank at Tulane University, where she worked with the top scientists that have discovered how hormones function and dysfunction. Dr. Berkson is now a professor and mentor for physicians, pharmacists, and other healthcare professionals within continuing education courses on hormones, gastroenterology, the gut-hormone connection, nutrition, and the environment. Dr. Berkson has authored 21 books and hosts the Dr. Berkson Best Health Radio show. And she had breast cancer 24 years ago and has made remission her mission. Dr. Berkson now specializes within science-based functional medicine tools in working with breast cancer survivors to do the same. And so, Lyndsey, are you with us?
I am. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. I really love what you've done in the industry based on your personal story and how you really brought this truth and clarity to many, many women, but the profound work that you're doing with other medical professionals and practitioners in the industry is really, really incredible. So before we get started on all of these incredible factoids and research that you want to help other women come to understand today, can you tell us a little bit more about what awakened you to this journey of remission to your mission?
Nothing awakened me to that at all. So that's not, let's see, how could I? First of all, when I was 15 or 16, I heard a lecture that you are what you eat, and nutrition made sense to me. And I went on this huge journey of organic gardening. I lived with Scott Nearing and Elliot Coleman, who started the organic gardening movement. And it wasn't that it was a mission. It just made sense to me. Right. I heard that your body is made up of what you eat, and you want to have as healthy a body as you can have so that you can soar with whatever your mission is. And it just made total sense to me. And my mother was an athlete, so I was always working out at a very heavy level. So I was eating organically and working out, and then I started getting cancers. So no, that didn't make any sense, because everyone now is getting the memo that you should eat well and exercise. And if you do that, most likely you can heal cancers or heal illness. But here I was being a yoga teacher, meditating, forgiveness, detoxes. I lived with Dr. Bernard Jensen, who was nominated for a Nobel Prize, and he really focused on detox. This was in the 1970s.
Yeah.
After I'd already graduated college. And so I'd been detoxing, meditating, forgiving, eating organic food, working out, and I kept getting cancers. And nobody had any answers for me. So it wasn't really like there was a mission.
Mm-hmm.
So I was always battling for my health, even though the things that we know to do for health weren't getting me healthy.
Right.
So I had already started writing books because I love to write. And in the early 1900s, I read an article that certain pollutants in our environment had hormonal action. And when we were exposed to them, like outgassing from a carpet or a brand new car, that dashboard smell or phthalates, a specific type of plastic, that all of those could act like a hormone, get inhaled or consumed and futz with your hormones. I thought that was significant, and I thought I should dive into the literature and see what was going on. And it was a whole new field called endocrine disruption that was only being formed in the late 1990s. So I was part of the research while it was being formed. And while I was researching that book, which was published as Hormone Deception, and it was one of the very first books on endocrine disruption. So 3 books came out within 3 months: Our Stolen Future, Hormonal Chaos, and Hormone Deception, all of which looked at this phenomena from a different point of view, and all of the books were fantastic. While I was doing the research for that book, I saw that the model chemical that they exposed pregnant animals to birthed offspring who had all the same health issues and cancers that I had. Exactly the same cancers. So I was like, wow, maybe I should send away for my mother's microfiche birth records, because they were on microfilm then. That's how they saved things back in that era, was microfilm.
Yeah.
Because nobody could ever figure out why I was battling for my health. So, and eating organically and exercising and meditating, etc. So I get my mother's microfiche films and I open up the package, and there it was. My mother in the first trimester was given diethylstilbestrol, which is the most powerful cancer-causing estrogenic compound ever invented, banned in 1971 as the most powerful cancer-causing substance ever, but given to millions of women from 1938 to 1971 as a prenatal vitamin, or if the woman was spotting, they often gave it to her to try and stabilize a threatened pregnancy. Interestingly enough, the reason plastics are estrogenic is that Sir Charles Dobbs, the physician that invented plastics, he invented diethylstilbestrol.
Wow.
So all of those are estrogenic. Everything he developed, he loved the porphyrin structure of estrogens, and that's one of the reasons that that plastics are estrogenic. Well, once I realized that it wasn't anything about the way that I was living, but it was an assault in the womb.
Yeah.
We call that an in utero assault, or the fetal origin of adult disease. So once I realized that, if I could sleuth the literature and find out what was known about the mechanism, about how DES caused cancer, maybe I could roll that back. For example, the majority of DES, they're called DES daughters, diethylstilbestrol. So DES is the acronym.
Right.
The majority of us got breast cancer at almost exactly the same age. The majority of us could not have children. That's why I have 21 books, because I could not have children, because the daughters born of women given that as a prenatal vitamin were infertile. So basically, no doctors could help me. Most doctors today have never even heard of diethylstilbestrol. It's like a really old hat story, a public tragedy whose time has come and gone, although now we're comparing many common day products that we're exposed to diethylstilbestrol still, because it was the most powerful endocrine disrupting compound ever made. So in the literature, they were able to show theories of how DES caused cancer in its offspring. And I was able to figure out possibly which drug might reverse the action that caused the cancer steps. And I put myself on this drug 18 years ago because I just kept getting tumors, cancer. I thought I had lost 7.5 organs, but I've actually lost 8 organs, which is very difficult to age and have less organ mass, because your organs have a lot to do with keeping you in touch with the planet, the stars, your biochemistry inside your body. They give you robustness. Each organ gives you something more than just the function of that organ. It literally gives you staying power as a person. So I went on this medication. No one else had ever used it for this ever in the history of humanity, 18 years ago. And I have to knock on this wood table here. I've not had cancer since then.
What was the medication that you took for that?
It was the end metabolite of estrogen called 2-methoxyestradiol. And it has estrogen in its name. So
right.
A lot of doctors don't understand it. They think you can't give it to a person who's had cancer, but it doesn't bind to the estrogen receptor. It
right.
just came downstream from estrogen. And there's actually quite a bit of data on this of being used for people who failed intractable breast cancer, intractable ovarian cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, quite a number of things. I had a dear, dear friend that had glioblastoma, really, kind of a death sentence of a brain cancer. And they had nothing to offer him. They told him they had nothing to offer him, but there were 30 or 40 articles in the rodent literature that when they gave 2-MeO, that's the nickname for 2-methoxyestradiol, the acronym, when they gave that along with radiation, it prolonged life significantly, like many, many months in a rodent, which would be equivalent to years in a human. So I put together an 80-page paper to try and convince his docs. But the way docs work today, the way medicine works today, is you really can't be a thinker outside the box from
right.
the way that your association faxes to you the updates of what you're supposed to do, the consensus of where medicine is. And the problem is that hormones have no real genre in medicine. Gynecologists, most of my patients come in. I was having lunch today with my girlfriend who's a nurse practitioner and runs 5 hormone clinics in Austin. And she hears all the time patients come in and say, I asked my gynecologist if I was a candidate for hormones, and they said they don't believe in hormones. Mm-hmm. Well, it's not like it's Santa Claus or that it is a fairy tale. It's biochemistry. Hormones are your foundational major signaling system in the body, but gynecologists don't treat hormones that way. Endocrinologists basically deal with thyroid or diabetes. One of my girlfriends is an internist in town. She used to have her own little cool concierge practice, and then she didn't like when the ICD-10 codes changes occurred. So she moved to Scott Baylor White, this huge corporation, which I never would thought I would do it, but I went with her because she's my girlfriend. And when I wanted her to test my hormones in blood for a certain reason, because there's a variety of ways of testing them, there wasn't even a code at Baylor. Nobody at Baylor ever tested estrogen. We had to go outside of the lab. No one at Scott Baylor White was ever testing estrogen, not even if they were a breast cancer patient or if they're a young girl because younger and younger people have less and less hormone signaling because we have such a dirty planet filled with endocrine disrupting pollutants. So it was so funny when she went to run my blood, she said, I've been an internist for 28 years and I've never run an estrogen test. And I said, I have no clue how you serve your patients if you don't do that. I say to nephrologists, estrogen runs the kidney. Estrogen rules the kidney. How do you deal with kidney patients if you never run estrogen? So hormones are lost. They're just lost in the rabbit hole of medicine. And women are the ones who lose out.
Absolutely. Women are suffering big time. And I just, that whole big picture that you just explained of the chaos in the system is the problem. And so to get perspective, so when I first concepted doing an organic salon, now this was almost 15 years ago. And you would appreciate this because from my understanding, you helped Metagenics formulate products, correct?
Right. I designed their first femme line for physicians for women in the early 1980s.
Which is profound. And thank you for working with them to be ahead of the game. And, you know, I had my first aha at a functional medicine training, a 24-hour, clinical nutrition therapy weekend with Robert Rakowski. And I remember him putting a bunch of different ingredients into a blender. And he said, you know, this is basically our future. And, you know, we dove in knee deep. And I thought, oh my gosh, like the salon industry for me is to help women from going down this catastrophe of a slew of chemicals. So I saw the future, just like, you saw the future. And this estrogenic, this excess estrogen, xenoestrogen catastrophe is.
But they're not just excess estrogens because they can block your estrogen. They don't just act like estrogen. So we have a whole generation of young girls that don't have enough estrogen. Harvard just published at a conference about 10 months ago, giving estradiol patches to 14 and 20-year-old girls because they exercise so much now, and they all have so little body fat, and they had a lot of body dysphoria, or they don't like their body image. So they gave these 14 to 20-year-old girls estrogen, and they all felt a lot better and were able to get off their psychotropic, their meds that their psychological psychiatrists or psychologists had prescribed for them. Mm-hmm. So people need to know because it's really important. I don't mean to talk over you, but it's not just estrogen mimics. What that means is it can futz with estrogen any which way, and that does it with androgens. It does it with insulin. It does it with oxytocin, the hormone that makes you feel like you are embraced by the planet, to feel good, to be alive. So most of our hormones, your neurotransmitters follow your hormones, and your hormones definitely, and so the chemicals in the environment have the potential, and they don't do this in every single person that's exposed, because the human body has redundancy systems, which means we have backup measures. Right. And some people's backup measures are better than others, or maybe your life is going through a lot of chaos, so they're not working so well. So anyway, I just wanted to make that comment so people don't think that everything is causing, I don't like the term estrogen dominance. I don't like what the people are thinking of, that estrogen's a bad hormone and that it's mostly dominant out there. That is so ignorant and not accurate. So I needed to make a comment. Sorry
and I think, and let's roll that into exactly what I wanted to kind of point to, is that the misunderstanding of our hormones. Number one, women have no foundational understanding of hormones to begin with. Number two, you go up to gynos, they go to a gynecologist, they think that they're going to have answers, but the gyno does not know. And then you get into specialties.
But the gynecologist doesn't tell them they don't know.
Correct.
Which is the real conundrum. They'll say, I don't believe in hormones. You're not a candidate. You're a high-risk woman. You're this, you're that. You don't really need them. You don't really need testosterone. You don't want hair on your chin and to be aggressive. And so they get talked out of them by somebody who represents themselves as a specialist, which they're trained in certain ways. They're certainly trained in hormonal functional disorders, for sure.
And often hormonal issues then end up in depression and all these other kind of things. And so they have kind of their list of what they go to and how they, conform women into this. My end point of this is that there is such an immense amount of fear around hormones for women, and how that is all trickled down the system of hormone replacement, bioidenticals. So maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about the truth about hormones and how they really can help save women's lives. And from someone that is actually on hormone therapy, progesterone and biest, not only for healthy hormone regulation, but how it can help with these, especially young women, osteoporosis, cancer.
Well, we're very, very careful about giving hormones to a woman before she's menopausal. So that usually we have nutritional interventions. And so it's not simplistic, although we did have that Harvard study where they did give an estrogen patch to very, very young girls. But most of us think of hormones as related to pregnancy, to sexuality, or to aging.
Yep.
And that's kind of it. And we don't realize that hormones run your brain, they run your vocal cords, they run your eyes, your optic nerve, they run your kidneys, they run your digestive tract, they run your microbiome. They're really the most foundational. If you were to have a physiologic internet system where one cell sends an email to cells to tell the cell what to do, hormones are your physiologic internet system, sending emails to your genes deep inside cells to tell cells how to act. And they're not taught like that in med school, but it turns out that that's what they really are. So a hormone delivers a signal to a set of proteins in the shape of a satellite dish, like a receptor, like a Pac-Man receptor. And wherever you've got a receptor, that hormone is delivering a signal. So you've got receptors in the lining of your arteries. You've got receptors in your gums. You've got receptors in your eyeballs. You've got receptors in your brain. In fact, the only set of studies that ever showed a 50% decreased incidence in Alzheimer's disease were the Cache County studies that were run in Utah, where they followed elderly, middle-aged people that were starting to age. They started out with no cognitive decline and followed them across time, about 10 years, to see who got Alzheimer's and who didn't and why. And if a woman had been on estrogen for 10 years, she had a 50% decreased incidence of getting Alzheimer's. But the real big deal that's going to change everything around is that the Women's Health Initiative, the nasty headlines, I wrote a book called Safe Hormones, Smart Women that goes into hormones in depth if you want to learn about hormones. And I've got a whole chapter on the Women's Health Initiative. But it made women and doctors alike, especially in America, frightened of hormones, especially estrogen, when in fact it's the opposite.
Right.
Only 10 to 15% of your cells in the breast really are in constant communication with estrogen and progesterone. And in the larger number of studies, breast cancer patients that are on estrogen replacement get less recurrence, less death from breast cancer, and less all-cause mortality. Let me say that again. I had breast cancer 26 years ago now. I've been on hormones 21 years. And it's not just my belief, the data shows that hormone therapy protects a high-risk woman, from getting an increase of a recurrence of the disease and death from the disease. And there's a great book that's just come out by an oncologist. I interviewed him for my book, Safe Hormones, Smart Women. His name is Avram Blooming. And he has done the only study on breast cancer patients, 14 years. He's given them the estrogen he chose was horse urine estrogen, which is Premarin. Right. But he was able to show that breast cancer patients on Premarin, compared to women who were breast cancer patients that weren't on hormones, had less recurrence and less death from breast cancer and less death from all-cause disease. Now, Avram Blooming is a very interesting guy. When he started his practice in Southern California, everybody was doing radical mastectomies when he had a breast cancer diagnosis. He pinned together all the data, and he single-handedly showed the surgeons in Southern California that lumpectomy with some kind of adjunctive care was just as effective without disfiguring the woman. And he was the single oncologist that changed the standard of care from massive disfiguring surgery to lumpectomy, along with, usually it's given with some kind of radiation, or, there are variations on a theme, but he was the guy that did that. Now he's the guy. He just came out with a book called Estrogen Matters. I'm lecturing for 2 days in Salt Lake City in 3 weeks to 150 pharmacists and medical doctors. And I'm giving the first 1 hour talk on how and why we should prescribe hormones to breast cancer patients and high-risk women. And it had to go through a CEU board, a continuing education medical accreditation board. They called me up on the phone and said, "We've never seen a talk like this before. We'd like to talk you through the data." And by the end of our conversation, they okayed this talk, which I'm going to give for the first time in Salt Lake City in a few weeks.
That's incredible. I mean, it's the very, very antithesis and the very opposite of what every physician has ever heard. Right. And from that one study, and the nuances that were involved in that, we don't really have to dig into that, but how it was given,
so there's a study that came out yesterday that said that they've assessed all the data, and breast cancer patients on hormone therapies are dying more. And we sent a letter off to Dr. Blooming, and he was able to show us that this was junk science and not put together well, but these nasty, scary headlines make headlines, and the reanalysis and the normalization of hormones don't make headlines. And so women continue to be frightened of estrogen. They think they should pride themselves if they age naturally without hormones, which is letting you shrink your brain, shrink your skin, shrink your kidneys, you literally age so much more differently if you're not on. Aging is the absence of hormones. That is what aging is.
Yep. I love how you talked about brain volume too in the book, and how just the decrease in brain volume is contributed to body fat, and all of these other linked pieces as well. I mean, there's just a lot to this. And Jim, who you had interviewed a few weeks ago or a couple weeks ago. Jim
Hinsere, the pharmacist that testified in front of the National Academy of Health Sciences. Yeah.
So one of my clients is a good friend of Jim and runs the AICP. And so he's just so well-spoken. He's a great guy. And you had spoken a little bit with him about how, when this study was done, the people that backed this study have now kind of gone and can form their own group and are coming out within.
So that wasn't the study. These people didn't back the study. So what it was is that let's explain what the Women's Health Initiative was.
Yep.
So the aging demographic of the United States is the fastest growing demographic that we have. Mm-hmm. So our aging Americans are growing as a demographic faster than any other demographic. So 40 prestigious institutions came together and said, let's take a look at women who are aging every which way and figure out how to protect them. Mm-hmm. They wanted to do that. And let's figure out how not to topple Medicare. So Harvard was involved, the National Cancer Institute, the National Institute of Health. Everybody came together looking every which way, and they wanted to do a study on hormones, which women had been taking hormones. It was the number one selling drug, Premarin and Prempro. Right. Prempro is a combination of Premarin and medroxyprogesterone acetate, or progestin. Those were the number one top selling drugs for decades, and women were on them. Doctors were happy with giving women them. It was like an anti-aging medication. And they were sure that this randomized controlled trial, they had an estrogen-only arm and an arm with the progestin plus the estrogen, would prove that women that as they're aging should be on hormones. That they were just doing this just to prove a point, because they were sure it was going to come out that hormones were just protective, as we've been telling women for decades. What you're thinking of is the owners, the CEOs of the company that made Premarin and Prempro, those CEOs. So those CEOs, their stock, when they had to stop the two arms of the study, which were called the Women's Health Initiative hormone studies. They had to stop them prematurely because women were getting a little bit more breast cancer, a little bit more stroke, and all of a sudden women were told that, in fact, hormones cause the very issues that we were giving women hormones for to protect against. And most everybody in America threw out their hormones, doctors threw out their prescription pads for hormones, but in Europe, doctors didn't do that at all, in fact. It was mainly in the United States. And those guys lost all their stock and their market share. And they realized that bioidentical hormones, which many women still stayed on bioidentical hormones. And in Europe, they basically use much more bioidentical hormones, and they kept using them. So these guys were visionary in the fact that they saw, our horse urine estrogen, and our horse urine estrogen combined with progestin, Prempro, they're going to not be big money makers anymore. So what we're going to do is we're going to create our own bioidentical hormones. We're going to run them through what the NIH requires, which is phase 1, 2, and 3 trials. And then we're going to be the only FDA-backed bioidentical hormones. Wow. So they created a product called Replenish, which just published July 8th, its third phase 3 trial. And they are now coming out with, but we don't recommend oral estrogens. None of us in functional medicine ever recommend oral estrogens, but there are 4 different variations of oral estrogen with progesterone. Patients and a lot of doctors don't even realize that hormones come in different sizes and bioavailability. But the bottom line is that they went through the randomized trials. They came out statistically significant. They're publishing data that bioidentical hormones are safer, better, healthier, efficacious. And at exactly the same time, the FDA has tasked the National Academy of Health Sciences to hold testimonies, of which they've already had 3 testimonies. Jim testified at the second one. Yep. And to decide whether to make bioidentical hormones too difficult to compound, and why should they compound them if they already have FDA-approved ones that the FDA has approved. So we have a brand new set of bioidentical hormones coming out while they look like they want to block compounded hormones, meaning you go to your compounding pharmacist and get it. So that clears up the details of the story.
Yeah, so my question on that is, if you go back to that study, and one of the issues, my understanding is that internal estrogens that were taken were a part of the issue versus using them topically, and that it's much safer to use estrogen topically than it is internally. Is that true?
Not true for that study, but it is true that we think, and not everybody thinks this way. Avram Blooming gives his breast cancer patients oral Premarin, so not everybody feels that way. But no, the study didn't show that. The estrogen-only arm, the women in the estrogen-only arm, once it was reanalyzed by statisticians at Yale and a variety of other places, had 33% less breast cancer.
Okay.
And so that didn't show that estrogen was bad for you, and it didn't show that oral estrogen was that bad for you. We still know that there's other reasons oral estrogen isn't optimal. But the things that came out with that study were that all of the women basically were 60 years old and older, and they'd been away from menopause for 10 years. And their receptors weren't used to estrogen, and most of the women in the study were obese. Mm. And the thought was, for women who tend to get breast cancer when they start hormones, they usually get them within the first year and a half of being on hormones. So most likely they had a hidden cancer. Yep. So no woman should ever start hormones without having a baseline mammogram.
Absolutely.
Absolutely a must. And if a woman works with me and won't do a baseline mammogram, then we can't work together. Because if you have a hidden cancer and thermography is not standardized enough, and there's too many cases of cancers that thermography misses. Bottom line, that's the way it is at this point in time. So if you're going to start hormones, so we think that what happened, the thought is these women were older, they were too far out from menopause, they were obese, and the oral part didn't pan out because the oral estrogen given to the estrogen-only group, they had significantly less risk of breast cancer.
Sure. Okay.
I don't know if that's helpful at all. I do a summary of all the things in that one chapter if you want to go to Safe Hormones, Smart Women and read it all up. But yep. The bottom line is that women now are frightened of estrogen when estrogen is very protective. And in fact, Avram Blooming's a cancer doctor. His wife had breast cancer. His daughter had breast cancer. They're both on hormones. He now has written and summarized the data for you, which you can read in a book. I don't make any money off of recommending his book, but he put it so beautifully in an entire book. Once you read it, you'll be angry that you were denied hormones. And now a lot of cancer doctors are telling breast cancer patients that they should be on tamoxifen the rest of their life.
Awful.
Which will block your ability for your brain to use estrogen, your kidneys to use estrogen, your colon to use estrogen, your bones to use estrogen. They've made estrogen out to be the villain.
Yep.
So,
the compounding industry, I mean, there's not enough money to help them have their voice heard. And, they really hold this groundswell of education for clients and taking this fear away from women. And I can't tell you how many women sit in the chair and I recommend to my functional med docs that, there's this stronghold between having the money to go to the GYN and having their insurance pay for it and continuing to get the answers that they get, to this gap of spending a little bit more money to see someone like you that can dispel and take them as a unique person, their unique ability, their baseline, where their lifestyle and everything, and really curtail this personalized medicine and personalized hormone journey for them. And, we really, hands off to you as far as how you've really progressed the industry in this way. And you have a passion for, breast cancer and kind of the mishmash of this industry right now. Kind of where is your heart and mind leading in this industry and what you really want women to know about just the breast cancer and, how that whole industry is just so confusing for women?
Well, I do believe in integrative care, and I believe in mixing the best of both worlds.
Okay.
So it's not like I don't believe you should live with a tumor load And I think that surgery is necessary. I do think you should do sentinel node biopsy to see which nodes.
Yep.
You need to know what's going on. And sometimes radiation and chemo are just exactly the right thing to do. Yep. But there's so much else to do, and it doesn't mean that you should never be on hormones. In fact, there's I have a little book on my website called Hormones and Breast Cancer Survivors, and it shows the human trials of giving testosterone and what's called an aromatase inhibitor to women while they're that was a case study of a woman while she was in treatment showing the tumor shrinking, but then a much larger number of women in a pilot trial showing that when they were given testosterone and aromatase inhibitor, they had they had less recurrence, less mortality, and better quality of life, because testosterone at the breast is anti-proliferative. It's breast protective. So there are hormones that you can go on right after you finish breast cancer care, and maybe even with some oncologists during cancer care to help you go through the treatment better. So our way of looking at, like I lecture for A4M and PCCA, and the stance has been for many years, if you had breast cancer, you can never be on hormones. You're a high-risk woman, you can't be on hormones. And that's not true anymore. I myself, knowing what I know now, I waited 5 years to go on hormones because I was scared. I was nervous because I was the only woman I know with breast cancer going on hormones. Nobody else was doing that. Knowing what I know now, I would be on hormones right from the get-go, depending on the type that you have, you know, the ER positive, PR positive, et cetera, which, by the way, the Casanellan-Bogans, John and Benita Casanellan-Bogan, they're the people who helped create the subtyping in breast cancer. And Elwood Jensen was the very first scientist that said that hormones signal a receptor, and breast cancers have different receptors in the Casanellan-Bogan. So I worked with them at Tulane. And when I have questions, I get to write. Well, now, unfortunately, Elwood Jensen just died a few years ago, but the Casanellan-Bogans are kicking strong, and a lot of people that I had the honor of working with. And it's not necessarily true if you have an ER positive or a PR positive breast cancer that taking that hormone feeds it. Those aren't the cells that cause proliferation in the breast. So there's a lot of mishmash of understanding. You really should read Dr. Blooming's book, Estrogen Matters. He clearly shows what the data says, and he did it enough to put his wife and his daughter on it. And I'm living proof. I'm now 26 years out of 21 years on hormones. I'm so friggin' old. I'm the oldest person anywhere I go, anywhere I lecture. And once people, I don't really say my age out.
Your real age. They're like, I'm looking at you and I'm like, I don't even want to guess because I would look like an absolute.
Well,
you look amazing. And, you know,
and people want to know, well, how is, every time I go see my breast cancer doctor, because they're the best palpators, she'll say, you look better than any breast cancer patient I know, but you should go off hormones. Now, surgeons know nothing about hormones. That is not their domain unless they've chosen to study that. So you can't, aging is due to the lack of hormones. That's when we start to age. If you want to slow aging down, exercise and diet are important, but they're not as important as hormone balancing and health. And almost everybody is a candidate. And you will, so when I worked at the Wiseman Family Practice Clinic, I'll just say this. It's one of the hormone clinics here in Austin. Now they're opening up a 6th one in Georgetown. So I worked there for 6 years. And Dr. Richard Wiseman had been in practice about almost 50 years, and he retired. So right before he retired, he and I were standing at the water fountain. And he'd been doing hormone therapy now for maybe 30 of those almost 50 years. And he said, you know, hormones keep you young. Hormone therapy, it's the golden grail of keeping you young. He said if you had 100 people and everybody got the memo of exercise and diet, but half were on hormone replacement, balanced, individualized, personalized hormone replacement, you could say, she's on hormones, he's on, oh no, she's not on hormones. No way. Notice she's not on hormones, because people where their hormones are still signaling those receptors look younger, act younger, talk more robustly. You are a more alive, younger person.
Yep. And that goes back to how hormones absolutely help run every system in the body. And let's leap over to your book, your recent book, Sexy Brain. And I just love the concept of the book. Now, somebody could leech to what they think that the book is about, but let's talk a little bit about the profound research in this book, from oxytocin to the love language of hormones, and, really, really how the research, put this book out, and it's not just about the big O in orgasm. So give me a little bit.
I almost called it how the big O prevents the big A, but it's so much more than that. So I call it sexy brain because sex steroid hormones run your brain.
They do.
The more you have hormones in you, the less you're going to have Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. They give volume to your brain, and about a lot of cognitive decline, not all, is shrinkage of various anatomical areas in the brain, such as the hippocampus.
Yeah.
But so this book took me 3 years to write.
Wow.
And I won't go through the whole story about why I wrote this book. I never thought I would write a book like this, but it had to be written. I believe that that hormones run our body and our brain. They keep humanity going. And that nature created sex not just to have babies. If it was just to have babies, we wouldn't have such a strong urge that continues after we get pregnant and have babies.
Right.
So when we are sexually involved, or we have even just hugging with children that isn't a sexual act, but a connecting act, we release hormones of connection. Estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, oxytocin, and there's another cascade of other hormones. Mm-hmm. These hormones protect your brain. We now know there's all kinds of studies that show that people that make love more regularly have less cognitive decline, live longer, men have less prostate cancer, women have less breast cancer. Hormones are protective. When you connect, authentically connect, whether it's either your spouse, your beloved, your partner, your child, your community, your church, those connections release hormones. And I realized in today's society, we're having less and less authentic connection.
Yeah, let's stop right there, because authentic connection is key. It's absolute key. I mean, everything from hugging, and we talk about that even with the endocannabinoid system, how it boosts the endocannabinoid system, which from your research is connected to oxytocin. You also talk about in the book about just pornography. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist, and one really important part that my mentor always talks about is a number of kids that he has coming in from all these different communities as sex addicts, porn addicts, and how it just fires off the part of the brain, but it devalues this authenticity that you're talking about, that structures our body in the right way, in the healthy way, and protects our brain. And we're getting all of these one-off transactions that really is doing the opposite of what you're talking about in Sexy Brain, this beautiful connection and being present with people in their lives.
Well, it isn't just an addict. Porn is the cultural way of life now. Whether you're Mormon, I have Mormon friends and neighbors, and they're having to talk to kids 6, 7, 8 years old because they're going to be exposed. One of my girlfriends is the intake at an acupuncture college in Los Angeles. These are healers in their 20s. You think that they're all into porn. Everybody watches porn. They don't think of it as an addiction. Right. They think of it as like getting a Coca-Cola or a wheatgrass juice. It's a way of life, and the young kids make love. It's totally different than the way older people make love on the whole. Yep. They make it's more forceful. They want to grab your neck. They want to have more S&M bondage kind of, that's what they're learning their sex from pornography. They think that porn is a natural way to be. And when they come together with sex, it's not the same, and they're not releasing the same hormones and having the same brain protection, which I bring up in the book. At the same time, we have a dirty planet with hormone sabotaging chemicals. So we've got this chemical soup, and it's leaving us with humans that have less capability of connecting, less control over their brains. We have, in the United States today, we have rampant mental illness, whether it's in kids or adults. We have a very ill society. And part of it, I think, is this lack of connection. And I think we need to teach in kindergarten and first and second and third grade the tools with which to connect, so that when you get older, you value that connection, and then you can release those hormones to keep a sexy brain, a sex steroid influenced brain, and then hopefully humanity will be protected. Because when I was a scholar at Tulane, it's called the Center for Bioenvironmental Research, the big question was, are we looking at the end of humanity? We're going to have gender bending, because when we're exposed to these chemicals in the womb, you can come out as different sexes, which we now know is happening. And we have much more infertility on the rise. In fact, one of the biggest issues of hormone disruptors is their ability to induce infertility. So we've been looking at all of these chemical alterations as threatening humanity. One way that we can fight it off ourselves in our own home and in our lives is to learn how to authentically connect. And that is easier said than done, because we live in a culture of narcissism.
Absolutely. 100%.
Which is connecting mostly with yourself and not with others.
And, there's, when we think about mindfulness even, the mindfulness genre, it's not thinking about yourself. It's freeing ourselves, becoming authentically connected to our heart and to ourselves, so that we can free ourselves to be more present and vulnerable with others. And we've just really lost this connectivity to ourselves, our own heart. I'm sure you've followed some of the research from HeartMath, where, there's over 40,000 neurons in the heart, and there's more electricity going up to the brain than the brain does down to the heart. And it expels a frequency almost 7 feet in front of us. I mean, there's this powerful frequency and energy to love and to this connectivity. And it's really what we're made for. Can you speak a little bit about this receptor, the 10-day receptor detox that you have in your book, Sexy Brain?
Sure. So if a hormone delivers a signal to a receptor, you want that receptor to be able to receive. That's its job, is to receive the signal. But if it's filled with a whole bunch of pollutants, like you ate string cheese last night, which was shrunk wrapped in plastic. So you got some plastic, and you remodeled your house. You got click-in engineered wood floors, and they're off-gassing formaldehyde. And you're in a house that was built 5 years ago, and all the sheetrock is made from gypsum that has mercury in it, which is an estrogen disruptor. So if you have all these chemicals, mercury, lead, you live in an apartment building, and someone 4 or 5 apartments away smokes, it travels through the porous materials. They've now done studies where they take a look at nicotine metabolites in the urine of kids who don't smoke, and they know that if you're in an apartment building where in other places you're going to have cigarette smoke condensate. So you have plenty of opportunity to be exposed to things that'll sit on that receptor. So measuring your hormones doesn't give you the whole story. It's just a level of hormones, whether it's urine, 24-hour urine, blood, saliva. It doesn't tell you if the hormone can deliver its signal to the receptor and then to the gene. So receptor functionality, at Tulane, all we would talk about is receptor functionality.
Huge. Yeah.
This is where your food comes. The reason you want to eat a really good diet and digest it is because you want all your B vitamins, magnesium, zinc. This needs to run on nutrients to make it work. But if it's occupied with chemicals, no matter what perfect hormone replacement you're on, or how you're young and you have plenty of hormones that your ovaries or prostate are making, you can't deliver the signal. So my diet was designed to clean away the receptors so that you could then have signaling. And in fact, I think next year, the year after, I'm going to do a refined receptor detox and take people that want to go on it together, because before you get pregnant, ideally you should clean out your receptors so that your child in the womb will have the best signals, because your hormone signals set up the adulthood of your baby while the baby's in your body, even before conception. So receptor detox is a very important concept. Dr. Wright, my mentor, who's called the father of bioidentical hormones, if someone doesn't get a response from hormone therapy, he'll put them on a week receptor detox just to clean out those receptors. I put it to 10 days because a week doesn't seem quite long enough. And then you need to repeat it again because we continually are exposed to things in our dirty planet and dirty homes and dirty offices and dirty cars. You know, it's just the way that it is. But the idea is to get your receptor functionality optimal so your hormones can deliver their signals to your genes.
And can you give us a couple of examples of that? Is that, you know, lots of broccoli and cruciferous vegetables, obviously cleaning up your environment, your beauty products, phthalates,
well,
food.
It's a 10-day program where you take a number of different nutrients in you that literally help bump the chemicals off of the receptor. So ideally you clean up. Yeah. So for example, iodine is part of it because iodine carries your hormones in your lymph system. Yep. In fact, iodine kills breast cancer cells. We use iodine. If you put in Eskin in PubMed, you'll get about 53 articles. There have been tremendous work on iodine and its ability to keep estrogen healthier and to keep breast cancer cells dead, in essence. At the end of most of those studies, it said iodine should be an adjunctive care in all breast cancer patients, but it's cheap. It can't be patented. No oncologist is going to mention that to you, but a nutritionist would know that. So we do use iodine in a careful monitoring way because you don't want to take ever too much iodine. You could get too little or too much of anything, even water, right? Water, too little, too much.
Yeah, absolutely. My skincare chemist and I have had this dialogue many times, and just the importance of keeping iodine and algaes in our body wraps and, you know, different ways of domain on the body as well, just because so many women are deficient in it. Thyroid and everything that you're talking about. So yeah, these very basic things. So I'm really looking forward to kind of jumping into that and how we can kind of scrub our receptor sites off and how really critically important that is, because
it's going to be the answer for the race, because otherwise we're so polluted and our hormones are working less and less, and we have more and more ill children. Their brains aren't working. A lot of that is due to endocrine disruption and also to the lack of authentic connection. You know, children are being raised on a screen. Yep. They're not used to looking at another human being in the eye. Looking at a screen does not release your hormones. It actually does the opposite. But looking in someone else's eyes and learning how to connect releases these brain and life protective hormones. So it's dangerous to give children too much screen time.
Yeah. And oxytocin, you know, there's all these different ways that we can increase our oxytocin in our body from, you know, from having connectivity with, loving with a partner, with sex, or hugging, or exercise, laughter, singing. Are there any other key pieces around the oxytocin piece that you want to bring that women can really capture and really imprint in their brain how important this piece is?
I could go on for several days on oxytocin. So the oxytocin signaling system, I think, is pretty much damaged by our planet. So even if you give oxytocin to someone, they might not get the benefit. In fact, if you put oxytocin in PubMed, there's 30 to 40 articles coming out every month. It's kind of the hottest hormone on the clinical block at the moment. There's a study, multi-centered study, looking at it to treat post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a multi-centered study looking at it to treat a postpartum hemorrhage. There's multi-centered studies. The Stanford Headache Institute is looking at it for treating migraines. And you'd go, well, why would one hormone, it can treat problems with social cues such as in autism and schizophrenia. It can treat pain in a variety of ways. They're even looking at giving it as an epidural instead of steroid epidural. So why would it be that one hormone potentially has all these things? Well, it's the first hormone of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's the pregnancy hormone. So it causes the uterus to contract for pregnancy and the glands in the breast to contract for lactation to occur.
Mm-hmm.
But the baby is just completely perfused. It is the first hormone that the baby is just flooded with. So I have a new book coming out. I don't know exactly when it's coming out, on oxytocin. And I talk about the many, we have receptors for oxytocin everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But when you are exposed to a lot of endocrine disrupting compounds like bisphenol A, which lines most soda cans and organic bean cans, and there's many different chemicals in the environment that block oxytocin's ability to deliver its signal. And then stress, very severe stress, especially in the first few years of life, will make the oxytocinergic signaling pathway not function well as the child grows up to be an adult. We now think that maybe a lot of psychosocial illnesses, most psychiatric illnesses, are due to some kind of problem in the oxytocinergic signaling system. But if you give oxytocin, it can overcome it. But oxytocin depends on many other things. It won't work just alone. It needs a whole list of things that has to be given. And that's why some studies show that it's efficacious for something, while another study will show that it's not. And I'm writing in my book, I think that's because it's not a single player. It depends on many things. But we're going to be looking at oxytocin in the future. I'm trying to right now get an IRB. I've come together with a bunch of pharmacists and created a product that's an alternative for proton pump inhibitors, acid binders, that includes oxytocin. Whether we're going to get the IRB and whether we're going to move forward, I don't exactly know. But we're looking at oxytocin for lots and lots of things. It'll be very interesting to see what completely shakes out. But we do know that as a culture, our oxytocinergic signaling system is culturally damaged by endocrine disrupting compounds, by maybe TV and thinking you should have it all. And what was that other point that I wanted to say? There was a thing I wanted to comment on it. I think that oxytocin, being the very first hormone of life, holds a lot of promise for many things that are going wrong in our society, but it can be taken as a nasal spray, as a topical, as a vaginal gel, as a vaginal cream. I've even used it on a patient with post-vasectomy pain disorder. But this is the period where we're looking at all these things, and what's going to finally shake out and what we're going to say, we'll soon see. But nature made our bodies to be able to make oxytocin. Oh, I know what I was wanting to say, but at the moment we're not making it very well. Our whole entire digestive tract, which is our mothership, is run by a healthy gut is a parasympathetic gut.
Yep.
And parasympathetic signaling depends on oxytocin.
Okay.
So your gut health depends on oxytocin. And most of us, from taking antibiotics, eating animals that have been given antibiotics, eating processed foods, we tend not to have very healthy guts. Gastroenterologists are the most happening genre of medicine at the moment, and colorectal cancer and esophageal cancers, these are all greatly on the increase, and on the increase at younger and younger ages. Part of that is due to the problem with oxytocin. So one of my favorite people was a monk called Thich Nhat Hanh, and he was nominated for a Nobel Prize. He wrote a book that is one of my favorite books called Peace is Every Step.
Yeah.
And he recommends to parents to have breathing rooms.
Yep.
Where you just hold hands with your mate, your kids, your cleaning lady, whoever it is you have disharmony with, and in silence and breath, learn how to reconnect with them. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's really an oxytocin promoting concept. And I actually talk to a lot of my patients about doing that to see, I think that's because we have so much doingness.
Yep.
We are addicted to doingness. And if you could have a beingness, the true vitamin B,
Yep.
beingness, room in a little space, even if you don't have enough room for a room in your house, a corner in your living room where you can be with one another and practice connection, then you're practicing your oxytocin signaling together.
Yeah, if you could look back at, all of from Thich Nhat Hanh and all of these studies, really it does come back to oxytocin and the power of healing. I don't know who wrote the book, The Power of Eight, but this morning...
Power of Eight.
Power of Eight, but this is the synergistic...
Is that David Kuhn? See, I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, you look it up. But, there's something I experienced this morning. One of my best girlfriend, her daughter experienced the loss of her baby. She is giving born to a stillbirth baby. And in the rage and the anger and this regular kind of process we go through in grief, what was so profound to me is, looking at this length of text messages, and I could feel and push out into this interconnectivity of the power of love and this connectivity and the grace of that, and how just holding hands in the spirit is so powerful, and how we can be together as well. So being present one-on-one with each other, and like you said, getting out of this narcissistic society that they have kind of tranced us, the hires that be, and all these different systems that trance us, stepping out of that trance, making the cognitive decision to step out of that trance into ourselves and be able to connect on that level. But who wrote The Power of Eight?
Well, all I see here, I never heard of The Power of Eight. I heard of The Power of Now, but The Power of Eight, Harnessing the Miraculous Energies of the Small Group to Heal by Lynn McTaggart.
That's it.
Is that the book you were talking about?
Yep.
Okay, I'd never heard of that before.
Yeah, it's a very, very good book, but it speaks into this kind of what you're talking about on the compound effect of oxytocin. Now, I really don't know of anybody else. I mean, I know there's a lot of people researching it, but this is going to be, I feel, a next up and coming really critical part as far as breaking down all of these mental health issues that we deal with in society today. So I really want to applaud you for going after this with all of your might. And
oh, thank you.
I'll be a test junkie if you want to. I personally haven't heard of anybody prescribing oxytocin, which is
no, it's pretty unusual. It's pretty unusual, but I've been teaching it. So I lecture for PCCA, that they make all the bases for many of the bases for compounding pharmacists, and they have teaching programs. So I've been lecturing for them for about 8 years, and the last 6 years I've been lecturing quite a bit on oxytocin. And I just lectured to a group of pharmacists and medical doctors and naturopaths in Canada, and I got introduced. I was really shocked. They said Dr. Jonathan Wright created the first wave for compounding pharmacists 25 years ago by introducing prescriptions and needing compounding pharmacies to fulfill them for bioidentical hormones. And they said the second wave for compounding pharmacists was created 6 years ago by Dr. Berkson by introducing oxytocin into compounding pharmacies. So I've been really trying very hard to show people what are the dosages, what are the contraindications, what's the science behind it, et cetera. And it's slowly but surely making a difference. But if you go to PubMed, which is the free service by the National Institute of Health, if you just put in PubMed.com in your search bar, you'll bring up a service from our government where you can put in a name of anything that you want to research, of all the abstracts that have been peer reviewed, which means it's not very easy to get an article published. The peers have to review what you write. If you put in oxytocin in that search bar, you'll see how many articles and studies are coming out on it. It's extraordinary. So this is available to everybody to go to PubMed, and you can take a look at oxytocin. And every single month, there's more and more and more articles on oxytocin. And it is being, and it's used from a very small dose to a much larger dose. It has a very wide range of dosages, and it has a lot of contraindications. Like, for example, it is a pregnancy hormone that causes pregnancy to occur. So you can't take it if you're pregnant and you're not at your time, because it'll cause contractions to your uterus. This is a contractile hormone. So it's completely contraindicated during pregnancy. and it's contraindicated during any kind of prostate cancer. So there's a whole list, and I'll have all that in my book. So just like anything else, there's ideal times to take it, and then there's times when you should never take it. So it is a hormone, but it is available over the counter up to 15 international units. It comes in international units, and it is available. And I had created a company with a compounding pharmacy to make this available for people, because even in those small dosages, it's very efficacious. 2 to 3 months after we started our company, the FDA made it illegal for compounding pharmacies to ship to states they didn't have a license in, which pretty much put a kibosh on any kind of shipping from a compounding pharmacy unless you're a manufacturer. So that we had a company for 2-3 months selling oxytocin over the counter.
So right now, oxytocin is not available over the counter?
No, it is available. It's available on Amazon by a company that I know nothing about.
Okay.
And I've had a number of my patients try it. So I don't know anything about this company, but there is a company that sells it that I seem to send a lot of business to, but I know nothing about this company because people learn about oxytocin and then want to get it. And it's called OxyLove. And some of my patients feel like it's been very helpful for them, and others feel like it hasn't. So once again, oxytocin leans on quite a number of things to be able to act, and there's other things that block it. So not everybody's going to get the same response from it unless you work with a practitioner that knows all these things, which I'm trying to educate them, but it's a slow journey.
Yeah, it is. Well, you are very well respected in the industry, and I believe that you will make momentous gain on this piece because it has a profound effect. So
I hope so.
Thank you for writing Sexy Brain and your work with oxytocin. And to kind of close this up, I always ask, guests, what is something that you personally, it doesn't have to be related to oxytocin or book or work, that you personally have awakened to in your life?
That's a very good question. I think the answer to that is, if you really want happiness and peace, you cannot want what you don't have. Mm-hmm. And that you can set goals, but if you're Velcroed to them, you'll be miserable if they're not happening now. So I think the biggest thing for me has been learning how to be with the isness that is my life and completely embrace that, inhale into that, enjoy that, not need that which I thought I needed to be happy, but be with what is to be happy. I think that's been the most profound, to really live that, not just say it, because most things you end up first getting an awareness to them, you say them, you talk about them, but you're not able to do them yet because everything takes practice. And so everybody's talking about mindfulness and this and that, but they're all a bunch of narcissists talking about mindfulness and all this stuff. It's just the way it is. And then you practice, you start tasting a little tiny bit of it. And ultimately to be with what is, to truly be grateful for a roof over your head or whatever it is that is the biggest recipe for peace. Mm-hmm. Peace, which Thich Nhat Hanh said, peace is every step. Peace is really what counts. Peace is foundational with hormones for health.
Yeah, I love that so much. I love that. And I will add, the truth is what sets us free. And when I really look at who you are, who you've become, and what love you've put out into the earth and to people that you know, the truth is what sets us free. And it's when we find truth in ourselves and who we authentically are, when we can just be and be thankful. And this exact thing that you're talking about, we are free. We're free of all of these things that we think we need to make us whole, but we are whole right here, right now. And so I appreciate you being on the Awaken Beauty podcast. Where can we find you, Miss Lyndsey Berkson?
You can get me at drlindseyberkson.com, drlindseyberkson.com. I've got a blog and a radio show, which you can get in through my website, or you can go to iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, where you can find Dr. Berkson's Best Health Radio. And my books are on Amazon, and some of my books are on my website. Mm-hmm. And I don't have my calendar up. I need to put a calendar up, but I haven't had a calendar up yet. But I go lecturing all over the world lately. So I'm going to, if you go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, I'll let you know when things are coming up and when the calendar is going to go up. But I do send out emails sharing, like, for example, I was just at a big conference with Dr. Mercola, was letting us all know that Google has joined with pharmaceutical companies in Monsanto.
Wonderful.
Google has gone very anti-functional, so they're driving traffic away from alternative medicine sites. And we all got together to figure out what to do. So I let my tribe know about that. So if you go to my website, drlyndseyberkson.com, you can sign up for free to my website, and I let you in on many things like that bit of information that are helpful to know, because knowledge is power.
Yeah, absolutely. I did hear about that. And, I think
so depressing.
Oh yeah. Like websites like yours go from profound traction to maybe 20%. You lose,
right.
You maybe have a fourth of your trackability, and it's information like this we have to get out there and, press in on. And so thank you for sharing that. And that's why we should go to your website, buy your books. I will tell you, I always buy all my guest books and put them into our little reading room in the back, and Sexy Brain is going to be my next go-to. And so thank you.
Oh, thank you.
The Awaken Beauty podcast. My gosh, ladies, couldn't she just be your best friend? So thank you for listening to the Awaken Beauty podcast. Make sure that you go and subscribe to whatever platform you love listening to your favorite podcasts on, and leave a 5-star review and what you took away specifically from this time with Lyndsey Berkson.
I'd love to hear. To hear.
Absolutely. And so till next time, listeners, stay sane, get sleep, and bring your sexy back.
Bye. Blessings.
Blessings. Well, hello, Awaken Beauty. Thank you so much for joining the show today. Were you inspired? Please leave a comment or your own personal aha moment so others can capture exactly what you did. Also, please like and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And if you're interested in high quality natural products for your hair, skin, and wellness, including organic CBD, please visit evokebeauty.com. Again, that is evokebeauty.com, evoqbeauty.com. And until next time, darling, stay sane, get sleep, and bring your sexy back.